Thank you very much. So it's difficult to follow a natural-born performer like John, but I'll do my best. And naturally, if you haven't figured it out already, I'm a POM, and we're having quite a tough time at the moment. What with us deciding that we don't want to be in Europe, and then us deciding we don't even want to be in European football anymore in such a terrible fashion. So really, the only thing we've had to look forward to is a fantastic series against Australia. But even that felt a bit. In rugby, it felt a bit, didn't feel like there was enough sledging there, with an Australian coach managing England and obviously Checker on managing Australia. It felt a little bit like it wasn't the real thing. It wasn't until the very end that I realized that the Australian media is always going to come up with the perfect headline to make us feel like we're really at home. Couldn't resist that one. So I wanted to talk to you about sort of three things today. So as you may know, we've kind of recently rebranded, or a couple of years ago now, from IRB to World Rugby. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the philosophy and the thinking behind that. I'm going to talk through a case study from the Rugby World Cup, and then just a couple of future trends that we're kind of noticing are going on in the sports world. So finding your USP. Now, whether you're a brand involved in sports or in any industry, all successful brands and businesses stand for something in the eyes of their target audience. So whether you're, a credit card, Apple, Adidas, any of these brands, you can generally pick up on something where they mean something to you. Is it Volvo means safety? Is it BBC means trustworthy? These are all things which resonate with the audience because you put that logo up there, and it fulfills a certain promise of the brand that's reinforced through all the messaging that goes around it. So when we looked at rugby, we were trying to figure out, what does IRB stand for? I mean, it's a terrible logo. We are actually based in Dublin, where it also stands for the Irish Republican Brotherhood, which is a terrorist organization. It's the Institute of Research in Brazil. I mean, there were all of these sort of mixed messages going around it. It's a logo that's kind of somewhat sort of cartoonish. You have to put International Rugby Board below it so that people actually know what you're talking about. And we didn't really feel like it was helping us to sell the message of rugby because, whether we like it or not, rugby is not necessarily the #1 sport in every country. So, what's the benefits of having that unique selling point if you're a sports league or a sports brand? Obviously, it's much clearer communication and messaging, but more important than that, if you communicate clearly, it increases the engagement that your consumers will have with your particular sport. And with that understanding, it becomes increased appeal. And of course, being the head of commercial, I've got to say that then it helps you maximize your commercial returns. If people understand what you stand for, then you get the commercial benefits that come with that, or it makes it much more attractive for them to be associated with that. So our objective was to make rugby union, in this case, the most appealing of sports. Now, taking a sort of sideways step to this, what's our mission as a governing body, right? So our mission as a governing body is effectively to protect the unique spirit of the sport, whether you're playing in the playground or whether you're playing in a Rugby World Cup or whatever. It's to make sure that you're reinforcing the ethos of the sport. And so we came up with this internal sort of messaging idea of what we wanted to do. We wanted to go from this idea of sort of being, old men with cigars sitting in smoky boardrooms, sort of making decisions about the sport, to being something where we're inspiring people to be involved in rugby. And whether that's driving their kids to play, whether that's wanting to go and watch matches, whether that's people that used to play picking the ball up again and taking the sport up again. And so effectively you look at all the constituent stakeholders that you have and you try and say, how can I make sure that I'm appealing to all of those stakeholders in one way or another? So again, when we went through this exercise, we kind of tried to look at okay, who do we want to be like? Who do we think's got it right? And in actual fact, we kept coming back to this thing that it's not so much when you look at an NBA or a FIFA or anybody like that or an IOC. It's not about the governing body. It's about the sport. If you are involved in the sport, and probably the two ones that most come to mind are the Olympic Games and soccer, is that they have certain characteristics which everybody understands. And when you talk about them as sports, they're a movement. They're not just a brand. They're something that people can latch onto. And so the actual name World Rugby came very quickly. We understood that that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to do what it says on the tin. Makes it very difficult for people to attack something where you're talking about World Rugby. You're talking about something which is a movement rather than just a sort of dusty governing body, if you like. So how could we do that with each of the constituent stakeholders? How could we make sure that all of those different groups that I mentioned earlier were actually buying into the philosophy? How could we make the sport appealing? What are the unique characteristics around the sport that really help us to sell ourselves as being different to any other sport? So it needs to be something that's inspiring to all of those people. It needs to be something that's a true reflection of what we do. It can't be something that's fake because that'll be picked up very quickly. And it's got to be anchored in a truth around what the sport is and why the sport is there. And something that's easily distinguishable from all of the other sports that you have around. So taking those things in mind, we kind of had a look and said, okay, what does rugby stand for? And perhaps starting off with the weaknesses. You know, there's a number of different forms of the game. The rules can be very complicated. It can be a physical sport. There's a perceived danger element to it. So it's how do you try and make sure that those things are pushed to the back, and then your positive attributes are the things which are brought to the front. So whether that's the unique values around the sport, whether that's the fact that, you know, it's both a positive and a negative that it's a physical sport, in the sense that a lot of people want to be involved in a physical sport. You know, rugby is a unique sport in the sense that any shape or size can play. So there's a role to play for everybody in the sport. And there's a certain amount of, we talk a lot internally about sort of positive amateurism, which is the sport hasn't yet got to a level of professionalism where, you know, you're making soccer kind of money in the sport, and it tends to mean that all of the people that are taking part in it feel that they are part of a movement to continue to develop and grow the sport, and they're doing it firstly because of their love for the sport, and perhaps less so because they can make a lot of money for it. That being said, there's a lot of history and heritage behind it, so we wanted to take advantage of that. And we also felt that there's this kind of unique moment in time right now, right? So we've got the Sevens and the Olympics coming in, 18 days or so. So that's a definite, you know, positive momentum for the sport. Then you've got the Rugby World Cup, which is just coming off the most successful Rugby World Cup that there's ever been, and then taking it to new territories in Japan in 2019. And actually, you know, the biggest kept secret about rugby union is of the 8 million registered players worldwide, 2.2 of those are women. So, you know, there's a big, and it's the fastest growing segment of rugby union is the growth of the women's game. So there's a lot of positive attributes that we can build around that. So I'm going to take that and then make the assumption that we're kind of a challenger brand. We're not truly global. You know, it's understood pretty well in probably a dozen countries, less well in other parts of the world. We're not necessarily mass audience in the same way that you get to with football, where football, you know, stands for universality. Everybody understands what football is. And the commercial partners associated with the European Championships or a Football World Cup, they're buying a mass audience. So we can't offer that. So what is it that rugby union can offer which is different to that? So it's important that that's clearly defined so that our commercial partners and our broadcasters really get why they should be part of our sport. And we kept coming back to this thing about, we talk about rugby union having 5 core values. And these sit in everything that we do. And so we took these, we sat down with these, and we thought, what's unique about, you know, passion, respect, integrity, solidarity, discipline? Well, ultimately, they're kind of positive life values. Yes, there's some things that we think are encapsulated in the sport, but actually, they're great traits for being a well-rounded person. So taking that kind of concept and idea, how can we take advantage of that to convey our messaging across? So what's that space? And that space is really this idea that rugby union is the sport of character. It's something where, you know, you look back to the history of it, it was born through an act of character with William Webb Ellis picking up the ball at rugby school and running with it, and everybody saying he's crazy, but it's an act of, you know, courage and standing up and doing something a little bit different. It's something which is a team sport where everybody has a role to play in that. So these are all, really positive attributes around how to be a well-rounded human being. So if you take that concept of it being a sport which has these unique values and a very special ethos, we came up with this idea of rugby builds character. So we put together this little brand film which kind of perhaps explains it better than I can. When you go back to the various constituent stakeholders, and I won't read through all of these, you get the idea that character is something that everybody, all of those stakeholders can relate to in one way or another. It's important to everybody, whether you're, a sponsor, whether you're, a player, whatever it is, there's aspects of that brand positioning of character which you can really relate to. It's an area that we felt wasn't really occupied by other sports, or wasn't any sport that was occupying that area wasn't doing so with a lot of authenticity. And interestingly enough, it's something which, when you take the contrast of the Rugby World Cup going from England to Japan, it's something that sits very well in all of those different cultures and kind of everywhere in between. Everywhere we've taken this, it's something that people can latch onto. And perhaps for us as a kind of, our growth strategy, it's even more important outside of the markets where rugby union is something that people know and understand. You take this film to a Germany or to a China or to a Brazil, they can all relate to this idea that, yes, I appreciate those characteristics of rugby. Those are things which are going to make me a better person. And that sounds maybe a little bit cheesy, but that's kind of what we need to do, is to try and find a way to kind of encapsulate certain brand truths that are going to help us in our evangelizing strategy to take the sport to new territories. And when you kind of test that out and you say, okay, well, if that's what brand rugby is, it's kind of building character, what are the desired perceptions that we want to have amongst our kind of competitions? And you've got kind of, Rugby World Cup at one end, which is the ultimate test of character. You've got the women's game, which is continuing to go rapidly, where, character breeds champions. You've got the sevens, which is a brand new form of the game, which is character has personality. And every time you take this to a new area, you can still reinforce the character aspect of the brand positioning. And finally, with the Olympic Games, it's a fantastic opportunity to take rugby and put it on a pedestal in front of a brand new audience and expose the game to people that have maybe never seen it before. So of course, the most important thing, and I kind of touched upon it earlier, is that you've got to be true to this. So you can't just say you're a sport of character if everything you're doing is not reinforcing that. So it's important that in the execution of everything that we do, that we're making sure that we are reinforcing those characteristics. And that's why we try very hard to make sure that we stamp out on any discipline issues that we have. We're very hard on anti-doping. We make sure that our players are very well looked after, because these are all part of the brand DNA of Brand Rugby, if you like. So that's kind of where we've ended up with this logo, which the new logo is designed to kind of do what it says on the tin, but then with this line underneath, which can help everybody understand immediately what Brand Rugby is supposed to be. So that's kind of the first part of what I was going to talk about. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about a practical example of where one of our commercial partners for the Rugby World Cup in 2015 actually kind of took that idea or that concept and then put it into action in terms of how they acted in their sponsorship of the Rugby World Cup. So I'm not sure if Dove Men and Care is here in Australia, but it's a big male health, sort of moisturizers and shower gels and so on, a male grooming product. They didn't come in at the top level. They came in at an official supplier level, which is one of the lower levels, which actually made it more difficult for them in the sense of how were they going to be able to stand out when they had other big brands like Heineken or MasterCard or whoever who had access to a lot of tickets, a lot more visibility. So they had to find a brand positioning that was going to help them, on the one hand, be very aligned with what Brand Rugby is, but on the other hand, also stand out from the crowd. So before we kind of go into it, I'll just remind everybody about last year. It's a truly phenomenal Rugby World Cup. It's just a shame the Kiwis keep having to win everything, which doesn't really help us a great deal from a commercial perspective, but It's life.
It worked out. Over the white.
So Dove really had sort of four sort of key aims that they wanted to achieve, and those are kind of broadly kind of divided into two. And firstly, they wanted to make sure that they reinforced, and I'm not sure if you can read it very well, but they had this tagline, which care makes a man stronger. And that kind of fits quite nicely into this idea of character and the idea of wanting to tell emotive stories. Now, the reason why they wanted to do all of that was because they obviously wanted to sell more product, and they saw the Rugby World Cup as a way of really accelerating their already positive growth trajectory. But they recognized that this was a crucial time in the kind of lead up to Christmas to be able to increase their kind of retail space. So they came up with this idea of hashtag Scrum Together, and it wasn't just used on Twitter, it was kind of used across all of their social media and indeed a lot of their above the line stuff. And I won't read all of it, and I think Ben said that he can make the presentation available to you guys to sort of absorb a little bit more and whenever you have time. But it was kind of around these 5 core ideas, if you like, which was that it's something that's relevant, that it was something that's credible because it fits with Brand Rugby. It was something that's flexible, that could be used across a lot of different media in lots of different ways. That it was also a very simple and easy message to absorb, and it carried through that emotive messaging that they wanted to get across. They used a number of different channels, as you would expect. The interesting thing for them was actually they didn't spend a lot of money above the line. They spent a lot of it on social. And so they were relying a lot that this idea of Scrum Together was going to resonate with their audience and be able to be shared a lot and used a lot. They were also lucky in the sense that they had a few union relationships which allowed them to use certain players as well, which was very key to their strategy. So again, I'm not going to read through all of these, but they had certain key KPIs around the campaign, whether that was how well they wanted their messaging to resonate compared to other brands, or as I mentioned earlier, the sort of in-store promotions and various elements like that. So they were very clear when they went in about exactly what they wanted to achieve, which I think for any brand is something that's really crucial, is that they need to be absolutely crystal about what it is that they want to achieve through their campaigns, because then you as a rights owner can help them maximize that. They came to us with a very clear plan, and one of our biggest frustrations actually around Rugby World Cup was a lot of our commercial partners came very late to the day to talk to us about what it is that they want to do, and we're like, this is a 48-game, 6-week tournament, and you're coming to us, with what, 2.5 million tickets sold, and you're coming to us 6 weeks before the event, and you want us to, erect sampling booths for you, or you want us to completely change our advertising so that it can work with your campaign, and that's just not going to work. With this, it was great because they came early, they were very clear about what they wanted to achieve, and so we were able to support it very, very well. And so they used it across, as I said, a number of their different channels, both their own and bought channels in-store. They used it a lot on social media, and it actually ended up resonating as being the #1 sort of talked about brand in social media around the Rugby World Cup. And they got a very significant share of voice. And what's interesting about this particular slide is you look at most of the brands which are sitting on the right, these are brands which are paying considerably more than Dove were to be able to activate against the Rugby World Cup, and they were able to stand out from the crowd. Admittedly, others have slightly different objectives, but that was one of the key things that they wanted to achieve, was to make sure they had a very significant share of voice. And indeed, on social media, they were very successful, because this idea of Scrum Together was something that was very simple, easy for people to share, easy for them to latch on to, and they were able to seed the idea through the use of some of their athletes and some of their own sort of planned media, and get other people to latch onto it. And so it ended up being something that was very, very successful. 160 million impressions across the campaign. They had a number of different mentions of the hashtag. They had something like 2.5 million hits on YouTube. I mean, through every metric you look, they were actually very successful. They were very clever around the use of Vine. I think this is another example of the fact where, because they decided that social was the way that they were going to go, they were very smart about making sure that they used every social channel that they had. So it wasn't all focused around Twitter or on Facebook or whatever. They took each of those and they said, okay, how can we use this Scrum Together idea to transcend all of those different media and actually make bespoke elements that worked for each one. So on Vine, they had this very clever idea of, because Vine's obviously very short, that, you know, it was kind of, you take the shirt off, you put the shirt on, and it was kind of this cool little thing where you could show your support for a particular team, and that was reinforced by them getting a number of their team partners to get involved as well. Again, they purchased a bit of media to reinforce that, but as I said, most of it was below the line, and this was purely to just try it. They did a bit of above the line just to make sure that they were keeping it top of mind with people, doing a few newspaper covers and so on. But ultimately, it was an extremely successful campaign. Again, I won't go through all of these, but we'll make the presentation available. But it's an example of where somebody took a very clear and concise idea that resonated with the brand of rugby, and were able to execute it very well across a number of different media. And I think it's a kind of a good case study, especially when we looked at some of the other brands that we worked with who were just not that clear about what it was that they wanted to achieve. You know, when you go in and talk, especially to the sort of worldwide partners who are paying us a lot of money, because they're paying you a lot of money, they end up feeling that, you know, you go in and you say, what do you want to achieve? Do you want to achieve awareness? Do you want to achieve, you know, a greater propensity to purchase? Do you want to achieve, you know, social media stats? You know, what are your objectives? And they're like, all of that. We want all of that. Instead of being very clear and precise about what they were measuring and what was really important to them. And in some ways it makes it much easier if you haven't got as big a budget to play with, I think, because you're forced to be a little bit more creative and say, look, we're not going to go and do a big above the line campaign and then sort of stress about whether that's going to work or not. When you look at the three big above the line campaigns that happened during Rugby World Cup, there was MasterCard did a very significant campaign around turning the world oval, but halfway through they decided that they had this other idea of 44 days of crazy, and they ended up running two campaigns in parallel, which rather than complementing each other ended up completely cannibalizing their message, where nobody really understood what it was they were trying to achieve through a partnership with the Rugby World Cup. You know, of the other brands, it was varying degrees of success as to whether they were able to cut through. And you know, above the line is such a, especially TV advertising, is such a wasteful media if you're looking to get to a specific target audience. Dove really knew who their audience was, and they knew how to get to them, and I think that's what made it a particularly successful campaign. So I kind of raced through that, and happy to answer any questions about that afterwards, and you know, you can read through it at your leisure and absorb it a bit more, but that was a particularly interesting campaign, I think. So the final part of what I wanted to talk about was actually just look at kind of three trends which are, I think, shaping the way that sports is going forward. And perhaps probably the biggest single one that we see at the moment is the growth of China. Even a sport like rugby union, which, you know, you wouldn't think has a particular resonance in China, just the sheer size of the market makes it important for us. And we've just signed a 10-year partnership with Ali Sport, a division of Alibaba, to develop rugby. And what's interesting for us is that they're approaching it from a completely different perspective to how we would do with any other media partner anywhere else in the world. We had a conversation when we were putting this deal together with them, and we think we've got something like 56,000 registered players in China, and we were talking to them about this, and they were like, no, you don't. So what do you mean? They said, you got about 88,000. So that's a very specific number. How do you know that? They're like, well, we have all the data about people that buy rugby shit, you know, who buy shirts and balls and all the rest of it. We're like, yeah, but you know, anybody goes out and buys an All Blacks jersey, and just because you buy a LeBron jersey doesn't mean you play basketball. And they're like, no. We have the metrics which tell us that on average, you know, a player needs a pair of boots every 18 months, and therefore we can deduce from that you probably have nearly twice as many players as you thought you did. And so it's this very interesting dynamic about, through e-commerce, they're able to ascertain exactly how successful the sport is. And their desire to be involved with us is purely because they think that they can sell more things. So we're putting a lot of content onto their e-commerce platform, and it's very binary. I mean, you have if you think of it as like YouTube, you kind of got your big screen there, which will be playing rugby content, and then all the way around it, it's kind of, okay, click here if you want to buy an All Blacks jersey, click here if you want to buy a ball. It's almost that simple, but just the sheer reach that they can give you means that even a tiny percentage growth in China is going to completely propel rugby numbers on a global basis. And they're talking about wanting to host the Rugby World Cup in 2027 or sometime that soon. So we definitely see a big trend there, and it's not something that's just for us. I mean, this is a number that really astounds me. So you've got 104 million Americans watch the Super Bowl. This is not the Super Bowl just gone, the Super Bowl before. It's compared to 150 million Chinese alone who watched the NBA Finals the year before last. So even the biggest sporting event in the US is watched by less people than watch the NBA Finals in China. So the size of the market is just incredible. And indeed, you look at what the contribution is at the moment of sports to the global economy in China. It's still well behind the US, but the sheer size of the market means it's going to be something astronomical. And even a modest revenue projection suggests it's going to be absolutely huge and crucial market to anybody that's involved on the international stage. And naturally, as head of commercial, I'm looking to follow the money as much as possible. And this diagram shows that you're going to see big decreases in Europe. You're going to see slight drop-off in North America, and where's the big growth area coming? Well, it's Asia Pacific, and that's largely driven by growth in China. And again, I mean, just some more stats which kind of talk a little bit about what the size of the potential is there. I mean, the interesting thing about China is that participation lags quite far behind viewership. And so again, this is what the interest is for us in growing that participation number. So as soon as you start growing the participation, that should increase the interest to watch, which increases the growth of the sport. Last two slides. So the second trend, which John, I guess, touched upon a little bit, is this idea of content personalisation. And I was trying to think about how to best encapsulate it. And I think it's this idea of, you get somebody interested in your content, so you're kind of capturing them. Then through data, you're trying to understand a little bit more about them. And if you understand a little bit more about them, you can serve them up more customized content. If you're serving them up more customized content, it's making them a more loyal fan, which allows you to, I was going to say exploit, sounds a horrible way of putting it, but it increases their fidelity towards your sport. And that loyalty ultimately is going to translate into them buying tickets, going to events, and putting more money back into your sport and into your sponsors. Then just the final slides. A lot of people have talked about this. Esports is just huge. And I mean, when you look at the numbers, I mean, I went to have a quick look to see if I could find some numbers. These are 2013 numbers, and already the numbers are absolutely astronomical. I mean, anybody that's got kids will tell you that they don't care about watching a traditional sport. My son doesn't play football, but he knows every single footballer because he plays FIFA 16. So e-games of one form or another are definitely a large part of our future. And the question is it sport? I mean, do we really care? Does it matter? Because ultimately, all it's doing is taking money otherwise going to other sporting bodies. They're trying to chase the audience just the same way we are. And when we think about where the money's coming that's going to be invested in rugby, we're not necessarily competing against an NBA, against soccer, against an AFL, whatever it is. We're competing against everything. We're competing against music, we're competing against cinema, we're competing against video games, because it's all now forms of entertainment. So that esports is going to be something which is going to be a huge trend going forward. And the only danger, of course, is that it's people far too old like me who end up being the ones that are buying it for a network and trying to put it on in a very traditional way. And not sure what it's like here in Australia, but in England you're getting traditional broadcasters putting esports onto linear channels, which is crazy because none of the kids are watching linear channels. The interesting things are things like Fetch, where you've got this bite-sized content where kids are already going, or YouTube where they're already going, and that's where you're getting all of these massive numbers. So a bit of a mistake, in my opinion, to put it onto traditional TV. But so that's just very quickly kind of three trends, perhaps a little bit of case study, and then a little bit about Brand Rugby. So, of course, happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Murray. Esports, 32 million people watching esports. What's wrong with kids? There's perfectly good sports on television.
They don't watch TV.
They don't watch TV. This is the big challenge for you, I guess, as well. You've come from a world where, that's how people used to watch rugby. They enjoyed rugby. Sit down, watch it collectively on television. Is that something, not only as you go into different markets, how they view their content, is that a massive challenge for you guys at World Rugby?
I'm not sure that it's certainly a challenge, but I think that there's kind of like a dichotomy, isn't there? They get into the car, it's dad, can I have the phone? When they're at home, they're straight away on the iPad or in front of the computer consuming content. So it's just making sure that you're getting your content into those channels in the right way. I mean, sevens is a great thing for us because it's definitely a much younger demographic, much shorter form of the game, easier for them to understand. Obviously with the Olympics coming up, it's going to create some new stars there. So that's certainly helping us attract a new audience.
As before, if you've got a question for Murray, just open up your app and press the Ask Question button. This is from Erin. She was wondering, how do you encourage participation in China? And what are the challenges culturally, I guess, about how you position your brand there?
Well, it's interesting because going back to talking about the sport of character, the one thing that we found that's very interesting about the sport of character is that it's something that's universal. It means something almost wherever we are, and perhaps even more so in perhaps if you want to call it Asian cultures of sort of Japan and China, where there is a certain amount of sort of discipline and obedience, and you associate those kind of things with Asian culture. So the brand philosophies resonated very well. But like our partnership with Ali Sport is an interesting one because it's something where when we went in with them, it's everything from the grassroots up. So they said, look, we don't want to just have your content to put it on our platforms. We want to do grassroots events. We want to do premium quality events. We want to set up a China league. We want to have content on our platforms. And it's only going to work if you have that entire ecosphere as a collective. And what we're trying to do right now is trying to plot out how you get all of those things together.
Speaking of building character, this is from James. He wants to know, when you've got a motto like that, building character, how do you align that with potential commercial partners when they've got different objectives, I guess?
Well, I was kind of trying to allude to it a little bit with soccer or football, is that, there you're buying a cost per thousand. If you're a sponsor of the Olympic Games or the FIFA World Cup, you are literally buying it as a commodity. Whereas in rugby, you're aligning yourself a lot more to the values. If you talk to any of our partners, whether it's HSBC, Heineken, DHL, whoever it is, they all see themselves as buying into those set of values, and that's why character and having this position of character is important, and why it's important that we make sure that the sport sticks to those core characteristics.
Now, what does success look like for World Rugby in, say, 5 years' time from Parambar?
Well, the obvious one is, full stadia in Japan, and having, reignited the passion that the Japanese have for rugby. For anybody that's not very au fait with rugby union, it's difficult to quantify how big a deal Japan beating South Africa was in the Rugby World Cup. I can't even think what the analogy is. I was going to say Leicester winning the Premier League, but it's of that magnitude that it's very difficult to quantify, and that's going to be a key factor in the success in 4 years' time.
Personally speaking, when you're one of the top dogs there, you're watching the Rugby World Cup and you see something like that happen, what is that like for you on a couple of different levels?
Well, it's funny because I was actually scheduled to be at that game, and unfortunately I had to stay at Twickenham for France.
Oh, you idiot!
which was the most boring game of the entire World Cup. And the great thing about sport is I don't come from a rugby background. I come from a sort of more general sports marketing background, and so I poked my head out of my office and was asked one of the rugby nuts, like, hey, Japan looks like they're going to win, and what do you think? And he's like, no, they're going to fade. There's no way, there's not a snowflake in hell's chance that they're going to win this game. So there I am busy texting all my friends saying, no, don't worry, it's definitely not happening, trying to sound like the expert. And of course, sports is such a great unpredictable thing, but we had done a good job of setting that up as being something that could feasibly happen. World Rugby contributed to Eddie Jones being the coach of the team, and obviously we made sure that there's enough money that's seeded through the various programs to give them the best chance of success. So, it doesn't always happen that way, but it makes you feel very fulfilled when it does, because that's what you kind of put all the money in there to do.
Oh, it's an extraordinary moment. It's hard not to get a little bit teary when you watch it there. This is from Richard. He's wondering, with the Dove campaign, what do you think the ratio of their World Cup investment was on the signing sponsorship deal versus activating that investment?
It's always an interesting one, because you're always a little bit conflicted. When you've got different tiers of sponsorship, at the top level, you're obviously trying to look after the guys at the top level who are contributing a lot. And what you're actually trying to do is stop people dropping down the lower tiers of sponsorship and then reserving more money to activate. You're trying to find where their pressure points are in terms of being able to pay you a big sanctioning fee, and we make no bones about the fact that we try and charge top dollar for our sponsorships, because as a governing body, 96% of the revenue that we generate goes back into the growth of the game. So it's not to pay Wayne Rooney an extra £10,000 a week or whatever. So we don't make any bones about that. But if I'm honest, I think we had hoped that Dove was going to be at a slightly higher level, where they probably would have then activated a bit less. But we were in a lucky position where all the positions in the next tier up had gone. So Dove probably ended up having 3 times as much to spend, 4 times maybe, on their activation compared to the fee that they paid. Whereas if they had been at the next level up, it probably would have been a 2-to-1 ratio.